Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the 2026 Norman Krumholz Speaker Series on the Future of Urban Planning. We're so glad that you could join us today. My name is Beth Nagy. I'm a faculty member here at the college, wrapping up my 9th year. I'll be your host today. You'll see me throughout the program at various times. To follow along with today's program, there is a print program available. There should be one either at your tables or at the registration desk. And if you want to follow along with the materials that are also available in hard copy, you can scan the QR code at the bottom left of the inside of the print program to have access to all the things today. Also a streaming link, so if anybody couldn't make it today in person and they're asking, like, do you know if there's a streaming link? There is. Just go to the event page and you can find the streaming link, and there will also be a video available. We also have hard copy materials at the registration table if you don't have enough in front of you. I'd like to take a moment to recognize this year's Speaker Series Advisory Committee. If you are an advisory committee member, if you could just stand up and give a wave, and we're going to give you a clap. Come on, all of you. You too, Dennis. Look at that. Thank you all for being a part of the advisory committee, and if anybody's interested in being a part of the advisory committee for next year or the next event for the Krumholz series, please just look me up and let me know. Love to have you as part of the team. I'd also like to recognize my co-chair, Dr. Dennis Keating. Thank you so much for being my co-chair. What an amazing group of people you are. 1 year ago, you accepted an invitation to be a part of the Speaker Series Advisory Committee, and now here we are. Thank you for helping shape this wonderful event. We'd also like to thank our sponsors this year, the Cuyahoga Land Bank, MS Consultants, and the Anisfield Wolf Book Award Fund at the Cleveland Foundation. Thank you so much for your support and for being here today. One of the things that you'll find on your table is a colored packet with Anisfield Wolf Book Award titles. All of those titles were award-winning books through the Anisfield Wolf Book Awards this past year or two. We hope that you enjoy some of the suggested titles. They're also for budding urban planning students, so not just for the professionals in the room. We'd also like to thank the Ohio chapter of the American Planning Association for recognizing this event for AICP certification maintenance. You know you can get your equity credits here. Our keynote speaker today is Dr. Sonia Hirt, Dean of the College of Environment and Design at the University of Georgia, Planning and Land Use Scholar. Dr. Hirt also has a personal connection to Norm in the city of Cleveland, and I'll let her and Dennis Keating tell you more about that. Following our keynote talk today, we will have a panel discussion about equitable housing in Cleveland with Tanya Maness, Adam Davenport, Dennis Roberts, and Terry Hamilton Brown. I'd like to thank you all for being a part of the panel and being a part of the event this year. Thank you so much. And before we go on, I'd like to welcome the Dean of the College of Public Affairs and Education, Dr. Jill Gordon, and Dr. Elaine Liu, Director of the School of Urban Affairs.
Oh, this is really high. Good afternoon, everyone. Or wait, I'm vertically challenged. Let's reframe that. I'm really so excited to see so many of our colleagues from Levin, our students, and our community partners here to engage in this important conversation. You know, long before I had the privilege of joining Cleveland State University, and although my scholarship and my research is in criminal justice, I was familiar with the work of Norm Krumholz. And this is because of having conversations with my colleagues across multiple disciplines. And, you know, when we would talk about his work in the Cleveland Plan in particular, it was those values that underpin it. Consistently and repeatedly in discussions, we would talk about the issues of equity, the importance of urban responsibility, and I think most important is the role of public institutions in shaping just and fair communities. And when I think about Norm, he was not, and I didn't have the privilege of meeting him, but I feel like I know him somewhat. He wasn't just a reference point, not just for policy, but instead, as we discussed things that he is known for, It was a way of thinking about scholarship, leadership, and place. And when I joined CSU a little over 2 years ago, I think my team would say I had this little bit of a crazy idea of developing a publication, which our School of Communication colleagues told me, no, it's a multimedia publication. And then colleagues in the Levin School of Urban Affairs said, Jill, it's actually the 50th anniversary of the Cleveland Plan. So our inaugural edition of Levin Leads the feature story is about the 50th anniversary and the impact of Norm's work. So this was published fall of 2024. And today, as we gather this event for the Levin School that falls within the Levin College, it also shows the strength of cross-disciplinary collaboration. At our core, we do believe in advancing knowledge, not within our individual silos, but across. And I know our community partners here that I was talking to before, I'm confident you would agree that the best ideas and the most durable solutions happen when disciplines talk and intersect. When we get planners, policy scholars, educators, social scientists, and practitioners in the same room to listen and learn from each other, that's when we see true impact. That's what we do here in Levin, and that's the reason we are here today. Our college is guided by a clear sense of purpose, grounded in our mission to serve our students and our community partners, advance knowledge, and prepare our graduates thoughtfully for the world around them. Recently in Levin, we created the first college-wide strategic plan, where our mission slogan is now, inspiring change makers, igniting transformation. And our vision is creating tomorrow together. That is what is happening in this room today. And I'm so excited so many of you took time to join us. I also think this event both honors legacy and looks forward. And that's a really great segue for me to say, next academic year, we're going to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Maxine Goodman Levin School of Urban Affairs. They turned 50, yep, woo-woo. On March 2nd of 2027 is the actual anniversary. We will be sending some save the dates soon for 2 signature events, and then we're going to have a smattering of fun in between. So be on the lookout for that, and we hope you'll join us, because it does offer that opportunity, right, to think about where we've been, who has paved this path, as well as where we're going. So I'm really excited you took time out of your calendar. I'm excited to listen to our esteemed colleague, and at this time, it's my pleasure to introduce, I can say, the newest member of the Levin College, the new director of the Maxine Goodman Levin School of Urban Affairs, Dr. Elaine Liu. Elaine?
Thank you, Jill, very much for welcoming to this community. And this is a place with lots of legacy and history behind it. So I'm very honored to be among practitioners, scholars, students, and my fellow faculty members here. What I would say is that I haven't had the pleasure, and I probably will not, have the pleasure of meeting Norm, but I feel the same feeling that Jill mentioned. I feel connected with him in terms of idea. Over the 2.5 months that I'm here, this event has been on my agenda even before I took the job. So I often reflect on what does Norm represent to me. And I researched about history, I researched about this school, and what comes to me is that he represents the idea of equity planning. The plan that works for everyone in the community. And when I think about that, I often relate to what I wanted to do for this school. And I shared with many in the audience that I would like to see the school to be the national leading voice in urban transformation. The national leading voice in urban transformation. The number one thing for me in terms of urban transformation is transformation for who? And this is where Norm's idea comes into play. It's an urban transformation for all. So I think the way we go about doing that is through community engagement. Understand each member of the community, where they are, where they want to go, and how we can make it true. So engagement is going to be the number one pillar in my thinking of urban transformation. And the second thing I will say today is technology. And you will hear from me many, many times from this point on how technology transforms society and the community in a scale, particularly with AI, that we have never thought about or imagined before. So I want to put this on your map. Think about how AI or technology intersects with the society, with public administration, and public affairs. Last but not least, I will say the other thing that I really wanted the school to be known for is known for insights for urban transformation. High quality, applicable, usable insights for urban transformation. So these are the three things: engagement, technology, and insights. Through those three ways, I think we will be on the path to be known as the national leader in urban transformation. If you don't like what I say, talk to me afterwards. If you like what I say, email me with your ideas. And I wanted to collaborate with you. And my name is Iling Lu. My last name is the first part of Lululemon. How about that? Now you remember me. All righty. Thank you very much.
Before we hear from our keynote speaker, I just want to take a moment to reflect on why we're here and what Norm Krumholz means to us. Norman was the director of Cleveland City Planning from 1969 to 79. He was appointed by Mayor Carl Stokes and actually made that a point of coming to Cleveland, is that he needed to be elected before he would come. And he was retained by mayors Ralph Perk and Dennis Kucinich. Norm confronted the problems of poverty, racism, widespread unemployment, neighborhood decline, and high crime rates, to name a few. To address these problems, Norman introduced an innovative approach to city planning, equity planning. A city planning approach focused on ensuring that resources, opportunities, and benefits are all distributed fairly across all communities, but in particular, providing more choices to those who have few. He moved away from traditional urban renewal projects to prioritizing the needs of residents, such as affordable housing and public transportation. It is not enough for cities to be beautiful and efficient, he wrote. They could and should be just and fair as well. And planners should work towards human betterment. You'll see that quote, the previous quote, and maybe one more on the bookmarks that you may have seen at the registration table. For all of you, you can take a little piece of Norm with you, and that's the idea behind the bookmarks. We like to think of them as normisms. And if you have normisms from reading some of his books and his articles, please share them with us because we'd like to remember them too. We also want to recognize Andy Krumholz, one of Norm's sons, for being the designer behind the bookmarks. Andy, if you're watching from California, good to see you, welcome. To help us remember Norm, we were fortunate enough to have Lillian Curry provide an introduction and memory about Norm with us today.
Norm Krumholz is a giant for our community. From the beginning of his work in equity planning and his first book, to 50 years later, writing The Future of Equity Planning, he has shaped a generation of students and planners and the way that people have thought about cities across America. He's helped us think about the people, how they're affected, how they benefit, not just the physical places in our community. He's inspired me individually as a leader and a mentor to think about the work that I do at the Cleveland Foundation. He has shaped how I think about how we should invest in the people and residents in our community. I had the privilege and honor to know him, to sit next to him for many years on the Cleveland Planning Commission, and to see how he fought for those who needed it the most. I often would ask myself, what would Norm think? How would he vote on this? What would he fight for? And going forward, I am so proud that Cleveland State University honors his legacy and continues to inspire the next generation with his work, with his writings, and with his impact for our region.
Ms. Curry was kind enough to put that together for us because she couldn't join us in person because of other obligations out of town. Before I welcome Dr. Dennis Keating, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Dr. Keating if you didn't know. He's an emeritus professor of the Maxine Goodman Levin College of Urban Affairs at Cleveland State. He earned his master and doctoral degrees from the Department of City and Regional Planning at University of California, Berkeley, and a law degree from the University of Pennsylvania. For 35 years, such a long bio, you know? 35 years as a professor in the Levin School, also served a joint appointment with the College of Law. During his tenure as director, the Master of Urban Planning and Development program was born. He has taught, researched, and written about a variety of topics, including housing, history, land use, neighborhoods, community development, urban planning, and urban policy. His 106 plus publications include 10 books. Is that right, or is there 11? Okay. Or 106. In 2024, Dr. Keating was also recognized by the Urban Affairs Association for his contribution to the field, kind of like their Lifetime Achievement Award. And he is honorary co-chair of the Speaker Series Advisory Committee with me. I'd like to welcome Dr. Dennis Keating.
Thank you, Beth. So I'm going to be introducing our keynote speaker, and we have a theme for this particular symposium dealing with land use, regulation, and zoning. Before I do that, I want to briefly review what happened, and the date was November 22nd, 1926, 100 years ago. We're celebrating the declaration of the United States Supreme Court justifying zoning and land use regulation in the United States, a case that came out of the Village of Euclid. And for those of you who aren't familiar with it, which probably is most of you, I'm going to give you a brief reprise of what happened before I introduce our keynote speaker. What Euclid did in 1922 was to adopt zoning. It was not the first and only locality in the United States, but its zoning eerily resembled what New York City had done in 1916. And property owners who had property in Euclid that did not care for the zoning that was applied to their property hired Newton D. Baker, the former mayor of Cleveland, and a notable nationally recognized attorney to represent them, challenging the constitutionality of what Euclid had done. They were represented by a feisty little 5-foot attorney, resident of Euclid, who was determined to defend the village all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, which is where it ended up. What happened was the property owners took their case first to the Federal District Court here in Cleveland. The judge, D.C. Westerhaver, ruled eventually that what Euclid had done was unconstitutional. Strangely enough, he was a former law partner of, guess who, Newton D. Baker. In his opinion at the end, he said, this case is destined to go higher, and it sure did right away. Went to the U.S. Supreme Court, one of the most conservative in the history of the United States, headed by William Howard Taft, former president and Chief Justice from Cincinnati. They were notable for some notorious conservative rulings. Nevertheless, Euclid's attorney, Westenbaum, was determined to convince him that it was constitutional. He was aided by, belatedly, Alfred Bettman of Cincinnati, the most probably famous proponent of city planning of the era, and had developed the city planning zoning guide for future President Herbert Hoover at the national level. Strangely enough, on the day of the argument before the Supreme Court, instead of 9 justices, there were only 8. Missing was somebody, George Sutherland, a former senator from the state of Utah. Things did not look good necessarily from the observers for the future of zoning in the United States if they ruled that it was unconstitutional, as had just Westenheimer. Then something strange happened. First of all, Alfred Bettman missed the argument. He didn't realize it had been scheduled already, so he talked to his dear friend, Chief Justice Taft from Cincinnati, and got permission to file a brief defending the constitutionality of zoning. Second of all, in one of the more unusual events in the history of the United States Supreme Court, they scheduled a second hearing, and Justice Sutherland was there. I think you are getting the note that Justice Sutherland wrote the opinion of the court by a 6-3 vote with a couple of conservatives, including the Chief Justice, William Howard Taft, siding with the majority. Sutherland, whatever you thought of his opinion, did uphold the constitutionality of zoning across the United States, and to the dismay of the property owners who had sued trying to overturn the zoning. That has stood the test of time, although you're going to hear a lot more about zoning and land use from our keynoter. So let me introduce Sonia Hirt. She is the Dean of the College of Environmental Design and Environment at the University of Georgia. She's also the Hughes Professor of Landscape Architecture and Planning. Sonia got her degrees, master's and PhD at the University of Michigan. Her PhD dissertation brought her to none other than Cleveland, Ohio, where she researched our city and therefore made the acquaintance of Norman Krumholz here at the Levin College. She's been a Guggenheim Fellow. She was a co-editor of the Journal of Planning History. She's published or co-authored several books, most notably Zoning in the United States, which was recognized as one of 14 best books in urban planning for the decade of 2010-2020. She also was a co-author of Contemporary Urban Planning and The Urban Wisdom of Jane Jacobs. I could go on, but it's a very long resume. I think you'll very much enjoy Sonia's presentation. She's going to introduce that herself, something to do with what happened out in Euclid in 1926 and what is happening today. Sonia?
Well, thank you all for having me here. It's very much a homecoming for me today. So before I go to my slides and turn on my scholarly hat, I actually want to give you a little bit of a personal introduction, and I hope not to take more than 5 minutes. So I am from a small country in Southeast Europe called Bulgaria. I'm not making this up. This country does exist. It's actually 1,400 years old and is the second oldest nation state in Europe. It's ever shrinking because of aging population, but for bizarre reasons, in the year 1993, I applied for a for an internship for young East European professionals, especially architects, which was my degree, to come to the United States. I came to the United States in the year 1993 on an internship, totally coincidental, having a degree in architecture, and again, for those who did not hear, coming from a very small Southeast European country. So when I showed up in the, when they said, so I applied to this foundation, which then gave me the funds to do the internship, and in the letter, and everything back in the day would come in letters, not by email, it said that I will be going to Toledo, Ohio. I immediately responded that Toledo is definitely in Spain, so I am not going to be able to do that. There must be a mistake. But it turned out, after I purchased an atlas of the United States, that there was a place which was called Toledo, not Toledo, Ohio. And so my first landing spot in the United States, a magnificent introduction, was a place that I had never heard of. So they immediately put me in employment, and my employment was to use my architectural expertise and redesign the interior of abandoned single-family homes in the United States to multifamily housing, and also hotels and abandoned apartment buildings, and so forth and so forth and so forth. So imagine my surprise in the year 1993, coming here. I have never been in this country, and actually immediately going to Detroit. I mean, that was my community: Detroit, Toledo, Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati. I got to tell you that it looked different than what we had seen beyond the other side of the Iron Curtain from Hollywood movies. So I got so surprised by it that I had to get an urban planning degree. So that's how I switched to urban planning. And so I applied to all the places that I knew, that the cities that I had visited, which included that I applied to Cleveland State. And I was accepted at Cleveland State, but it turned out there was not enough funding. I'm sure that you've never heard that one before. So the University of Michigan on the other side had full funding, so that's how I ended up there. So in a way, for today, I'm living the life I didn't have as a student at Cleveland State. So that makes me feel like a queen for a day, because I think that's probably how amazing it must be to be a student here. So to go back to my story, before I go to the slides, so why would anyone, how did I even develop the interest in that sort of, in land use regulation? Because again, you have to imagine the surprise of the then young foreigner whose first assignment is to understand that actually in the United States, they do not use the metric system. And then you have to do all your things in a different way from what you were trained for. And the second surprise is that the very first document that I was given to read was at the time the zoning ordinance of Toledo, Ohio. And it was so surprising and such a delightful reading. I truly enjoyed reading it because it was such a glimpse into something that was totally unexpected. And what was so unexpected? If you come from my part of the world and you come to the United States in the year 1993, we thought that in the United States, private property rights are sacred. I mean, that's what the United States is known for. And so they give you this thing that's called the zoning ordinance, and you find it to be so shockingly restrictive to the private property rights of people for reasons that I cannot comprehend. So it was exactly the opposite of what I actually had expected to find in many ways. So I went to school, this and that, long story. And so some years after that, I finally, after writing about other stuff, eventually I wanted to address my initial curiosity of why zoning ordinances in the United States of America are, from my perspective as a foreigner, so different from what I thought they would be. So the book that is usually referenced, I understand, was part of the reading material. It's called Zoned in the USA. But it's not about zoning in the United States. Actually, it's about zoning in the United States as compared to other countries. So the uniqueness is what I was trying to bring up. So my purpose here is I will not be covering the history of Euclid. It just happens to be that I've been invited in this very year. I would rather, and they're greater experts on me, Danny certainly knows by far more. So I would like to tell you how we got there rather than where we will be, because it's a very unusual story. To those of you who are probably have been educated through all the levels of the American planning education system, and you are citizens of the United States your entire life, this may seem routine. Like, this is how we do it. We have single-family housing areas, we have multifamily housing, too, whatever, commercial, and so forth and so forth. This is actually a very unusual system. If you see it through a foreigner's eyes, it's actually an invention. I don't know whether that's a good invention or a bad invention, because you're going to be the judges, but it is actually an invention. And this is the part of the presentation that I would like to, of the book, so to say, that I'd like to share with you. I also want to kind of say that I have received, of course, the book was published about 10 years ago, so you know, there have been all kinds of commentaries about it. I think the one that really touched my heart is many people, you know, we all know that we live lives very busy and so forth, and there's a real mental health crisis in this country, and you know, there's a whole crisis with people not being able to sleep at night. I have been told on many occasions that my book works like a sleeping pill with no chemistry. So because of this, I feel I have made a real contribution to humanity. All right, now on topic. So normally I'm very energetic and jump up and down, but this screen is way too high, so this is going to be a different choreography. Oh, and I just wanted to mention that I did have the opportunity to meet Norm. So that was one of the reasons I applied here, but regretfully, at any rate. You know, that's those second chances. I did end up at Cleveland State after all. So at any rate, if images are not given source, the majority of the images are from the early 20th century before Euclid, from a publication which was called at the time the Architectural Forum. So again, my point here is to highlight to you how this idea that the single-family home is a separate type of a residential experience, and therefore it deserves its own place in the world, protected from others, is actually a very unusual idea. It doesn't mean that there are no single-family homes in other countries. Of course there are. And it doesn't mean that, you know, they're not similar categories like the ones we use in the United States. But there is a very big difference in degree. And I would like, again, it's the exceptionalism, good or bad, of the American experience that would be the focus of this presentation. So again, my point is how we got here. And then I think for our discussion after that, maybe what we do from here. So this is the eternal, infamous excerpt from the Euclid versus Ambler case that I think most people recognize best. I'm trying to go here with the Cleveland green, and it's a little softer than I thought, so can people read the green? Okay, because that was supposed to be the highlight, but now it appears to be paler than what I wanted. So anyway, the key point being that the development of detached house sections, that is single-family homes, is retarded by their mixture with apartment housing, and therefore it could result in the destruction of the entire section of private house purposes. And again, the infamous quote that an apartment house is a mere parasite when put among single-family homes that apparently were perceived as something so different. That, of course, was not always the case. Indeed, it's actually an innovation that happened around the beginning of the 20th century in the United States. So, I mean, this is kind of the very stereotypical result of the zoning regulations that we have been writing for over 100 years. I know, you know, the urban environment is much more complicated than just this image, but you don't have to be a world traveler to know that it's actually quite unusual. It doesn't happen just because of land use regulation. It happens obviously because of politics, economics, culture, real estate. I mean, you know, no one thing in the world can be explained by one factor, but the way we regulate land use does have something to do with it. It does play a role, and I think that most people would say that this is a perfectly reasonable argument to make. So in the parts of the world that I come from, so anyway, so that was my chief claim. So this is the whole thing, made in America. Just keep this in the back of your mind. So where I come from, that happens at the bottom to be Belgrade, which is in Serbia, which is like, you know, next door. So I actually grew up in one of these socialist era housing estates that supposedly everyone hates, but, you know, they kind of worked, and I have a whole story about this. What you see above is something that often Americans, because we are sort of an offspring of not all of us, but, you know, a part of us, from Britain, we compare ourselves, but these are actually suburbs in London. So obviously people can share common traditions in other aspects of life, but in terms of how we live, what is the most, the most common way of living in your home, how it looks, what structure it's positioned to, the difference between this, obviously, and this, and again, these are a little stereotypical because not everything looks exactly this way, is actually there is a very, very significant contrast. So I gave an interview to the New York Times a few years ago, and they did their own maps. So I'm just borrowing from them. So what they did, and this is another point I wanted to make, people associate this with suburban patterns. So we talk about the exclusionary zoning a lot in suburbs. But I think that's another misconception. an unusually high share of American cities, not suburbs, are actually really made mostly for single-family homes. And I do know that this is changing. That's what we're going to talk about later. But it's not suburbs that we're talking about. We actually are talking about the American city. So these are New York Times maps. So if you don't think they're accurate, please, I'll let you know, argue with them. But we see the city of Minneapolis, now everyone's darling because they, now allow triplexes in single-family homes. And at the time, so again, this was a few years ago, I think this was 2021, I can't remember. It says, if you can read it, 70% of all the residential land in the city of Minneapolis is actually for single-family homes at the time, and that is different today. Portland, Oregon, very progressive city, this and that, 77%. Now, they may be at different densities. It's not all the same. I'm, again, making a very complex story, very simple. But at any rate, these are unusually high percentages. And what I want to bring up again to your attention, I want to repeat myself, it's not that other countries don't have areas dominated by single-family homes. That's not the point. Of course they exist all over the world. The point is that here, these zones in such generous percentages out of the total land area are actually legally mandated. And that is the difference. Of course, they would happen anyway for other reasons, cultural, demographics, that's what people want, preferences, I don't know, the real estate market. But it would not actually be a matter of municipal law. In most European countries, there is no debate about accessory units because it's not even a thing. Like, of course you can have your in-laws. Of course you can separate your house and then have your brother live right next to you. That wouldn't be even a legal, it's not something to argue about legally. So it's the fact that we have come up with this idea as Americans that an extraordinarily high share of urban, not to mention suburban, where the percentages can go to above 90, is actually zoned for that one thing, and that is actually really unusual. So again, from the same article by the New York Times, in Chicago, 79%, again, this maybe it's a little bit down, but it ain't going to be something dramatically different than what it was when the New York Times published this. Seattle, 81%, and I don't recall Cleveland being in the same article, but at any rate, I'm sure that you know your percentages. Charlotte, North Carolina, 84%, San Jose, 94%. Well, you just don't see this every day. I mean, you do see this every day, but you see this in the United States of America. It might be a great thing. I mean, people have more space, they have more privacy. Hey, I'm not here to judge. I'm just telling you that if you think this is normal, it's not normal. It's actually very exceptional. That's the whole point. And, I got my research assistant just, before I came. She read for me. I taught her, and she's from India. I'm telling you, read the zoning ordinance, remembering myself coming from Bulgaria when I was taught, read the zoning ordinance. So she read what's latest, and from what I can tell without knowing the land share percentages, particularly in Cleveland, these definitions are still very powerful. Limited one-family district generally allows only one type of living, not to mention that it doesn't allow anything else by living, except living. You have similar categories in European land development regulations, but they are simply not as restrictive. You'd have bakeries and banks, and you would not actually be asked the question. So this is the limited one-family district. It's not a criticism of Cleveland. I'm just pointing to the facts, unless the zoning ordinance, A, changed since yesterday, B, my research assistant didn't do the proper research. But if that's the case, blame it on her. And then even in the one-family district, which actually allows things, you see that what is allowed is a very limited portfolio of other uses. And generally, we are trying to very clearly separate work from home, which is a little absurd in this year because a lot of people work from home, but this legacy lives. And in addition, that, in general, single and multifamily homes are not to live together. And even single and two-family homes are apparently not to live together, as they did before the zoning of America in the early 1900s. So when I was writing the book, which was now 10 years ago, my husband is also a graduate of Michigan. We are both urban planners by degree. And he was saying, like, who on earth would want to write a book about zoning? And second, who on earth would want to read a book about zoning? So he tried to discourage me, but I was like, you know what? Let me show you. Let me show you whether this actually could be fun, because it's not about the technical regulations, but about the opportunity to use these technical regulations as a window to actually people's ideas, to what they thought is proper, desirable, expected, normal, routine, and what is ultimately the gold standard of living. So I said, I'm going to write the book, and now I live to tell the story. And so somewhere, I feel, I mean, of course, there have been books about this for years and years and years and years, but somewhere about the year 2020, like the profile of the debate became more prominent. And this has nothing to do with the fact that it's not that my book provoked any of this, but it appears that I simply wrote it at the right time. And, you know, in life, timing is everything, because in about 5 years, so about the year 2020, you could actually find mainstream American publications to say exactly what I was saying. Single-family zoning, I don't know whether you want to call it good or bad. I'm not God to judge. Maybe it has many benefits. The point is that it's weird. It's just different. It's just not, it's not the only way that you actually can think of regulating how people live in a city. So that was a little gratifying to me. And also I can, you know, I could tell my husband, see, I was telling you it was going to be a topic, and somebody would eventually want to read it. So he had never read it, by the way. At any rate, no one's perfect. So let me tell you something else. You know, this is kind of forgotten. We might be, I don't know, are we celebrating or uncelebrating? But whatever it is, we are recognizing that exactly 100 years ago, well, not exactly, but nearly, the foundational case of Euclid versus Ambler happened in the United States. There is an 150th anniversary also to be celebrated, and it's something that actually occurred in Germany. So it is true to say that the first comprehensive zoning ordinance in the world may be that of New York City. But the first, not as comprehensive, but still citywide, zoning map and ordinance are actually produced in Germany. And of course you can argue with that, because as historically minded people, nothing starts at some point, at some place. There is always precedent. Yeah, we can go to the Code of Hammurabi, and you know there's still some building code elements. So nothing starts at some place. There is always prehistory to every history. But to simplify this very complex, thousands of years old history of how to regulate land uses, it's generally considered that the modern zoning principles did originate in Germany. And the year 1876 is a year when, at the time, a very famous, at the time, German professor whose name is Reinhard Baumeister. And you know, Baumeister actually means a master of building, so the man lived up to his name. So he actually wrote this gigantic book, which I have not read. I had to get my daughter to translate parts of it from German. So he wrote this enormous book in which he was saying something is happening during these industrial times, that we are observing a natural separation, for example, of industry, warehouses in Germany, housing areas. It's happening anyway, but we're allowing it to happen without much thinking about it. So it's happening anyway. Let's actually think about it. So he first advocated that municipalities, obviously initially in Germany, would actually have regulations that would vary by district. And this is why it's often considered that in modern history, modern Western history at least, the first comprehensive, I don't know how comprehensive, the first kind of forward-thinking proposal that, you know, we should regulate cities by land use, and the regulations should vary by area. So that was kind of revolutionary at the time. So it took Baumeister a long time to actually convince anyone to do that. It was a big deal. So although his book was published in 1876, so this makes it 150 years old, the first city that adopted it, and this is widely considered the first citywide zoning map in the world, at least in the Western world, is actually in Frankfurt, Germany in the year 1891. And it very much looks like our maps today somewhat. So I guess, you can see the lineage. But it's all about the devil is in the definitions. I once wrote an article with that very title. If you read the definitions, they are not our definitions. And of course, this is the 1891, so of course their definitions could not have been the same. But certain things that are obvious, and you can't tell by the map unless you read the text. For example, the area that is dark blue in the middle was already very well developed, and there were practically no land use regulations there, because what would you do? Kick them out? It was too late. Pretty much like New York in 1916, first comprehensive citywide zoning ordinance in the world, but they didn't have a single-family zone. They don't have a single-family zone in New York until the 30s. What would you do? Where would you put them? It was already too late. So in Germany, they tended to not have strict regulations for the central areas, and regulations became more intricate only for the periphery, where there was an attempt to separate larger estates, kind of the bourgeois places, from the working class. But again, the regulations were extremely fluidly interpreted, and although one is tempted to say, oh, probably the light green is single-family homes, if you bother to see what it actually says, from today's point of view, it's a mild form of what we call today a mixed-use district, because all their districts were mixed-use. That's how people lived for the majority of human history. Do you think actually people could live in a place and not do business? In the 17th century, it was absolutely impossible. If you have to go back in history and try to explain to somebody in the year 1850 that, we need to mandate that you live here but you work elsewhere, people wouldn't understand what you're talking about. So anyway, it's an aberration in history and also in geography. So it was a very difficult process to actually accept the very idea to the United States, for the very simple reason that I tried to share with you when I came back from another country and they gave me the zoning ordinance. I thought in America that would definitely be impossible, because it contradicts everything I expected about the freedom of property rights. So Lawrence Vailor, those of you who know history, one of the most famous housing experts of his time, in 1914, having read every document possibly existing about German zoning, at the time considered one of the most progressive urban ideas at the time, in 1914, only 12 years before, Euclid made the following statement: it ain't never gonna happen in America. People are not gonna accept it because they will never accept that the government would actually be telling them and putting these restrictions on private property. So in 1914, Germany has already more or less zoned its big cities. It went to Switzerland, to Scandinavia, the Russians are zoning. The English always a little late to the game. They come in like 1913 or something. But anyway, it's already an idea that is powerfully spreading. So in 1914, our greatest housing expert here is saying that, I won't read the whole quote, but in short, oh, we have cast longing eyes at the shores of Germany and not understanding what is wrong with us here, that it would be impossible for us to engraft upon American civilization the otherwise well-established principle that has been operating in Germany for generation or more. And so why? Again, because, and that's actually why in New York they didn't have a single-family zone, because it was initially thought that it wouldn't be legal. They were right. It took them 10 years to figure out that that's legal. So for the very same reason, because it seems that it's so restrictive on the rights of the individual to do with their land or property what they wish, that it seemed to be a profoundly un-American idea in 1914. So a magic happened in 12 years, and what became completely unattainable actually became the norm. So of course, let me repeat, why the fear? This is from the Cincinnati Enquirer. I think it's right about 1916. Enough said. So this is the time where, there's Bolshevism rising. If I'm not mistaken, Bettman had to write to the Cincinnati Enquirer explaining himself that he has never been to Russia. He does not speak Russian, and zoning has nothing to do with Russia, God forbid, which was actually a German idea. There's a total misunderstanding of the whole thing, because guess what? The big Russian cities of the Russian Empire, Moscow and St. Petersburg, had something like zoning. And you know what? When they turned communist, they abolished it. Why? Because zoning only works if if the government also owned the land, like urban land was owned, it was nationalized after 1918 in Russia, they didn't need zoning. They owned the land. Why bother write regulations? The state will say and build as it wishes. So as a matter of fact, zoning is not only communism, but zoning is something that exists in capitalism because all it does is actually regulate the initiatives of the private sector, who is the chief city builder. If the municipality or the state in some form was your chief city builder, the municipality or the state doesn't have to regulate itself so strictly because it is itself. And one does not need to regulate oneself the way one regulates others. So this was a total misconception, but anyway, you know, people were afraid, so there was opposition. And yet, how did it work? Through what we do know to be very powerful aspect of planning, through a lot of storytelling. It took decades to convince the American public that what could be a foreign idea actually could work on American ground and is not an anti-American idea. So you can go through all kinds of records in which you know examples, both visual and textual examples of how the story was made, how they made something which was fringe and seemingly anti-American to something that actually became the essence of a type of an American dream. And by the way, the word American dream, people think it has been forever, but it kind of dates since 1928. It's another publication. So anyway. So what is the problem with the picture? Why is this development not harmonious? There is nothing really wrong with it. I mean, there is no litter. I mean, it seems perfectly fine. The problem, obviously, is that you had single-family homes, and then next to it, a multifamily home. And again, this was not a good idea. So this is pre-Euclid, so there is a lot of propaganda when you take something which is a fringe idea, of course, every time in human history, until you make it into the mainstream. Chicago, again, this for some reason, it was happening in Chicago pre-zone, so certain separation was already occurring, you can see by the type of structures. But again, they're arguing harmonious development. Is that development, here is a great example for you all, this is like, I don't know, 1918 or something, a clearly defined separation between private residence and apartment. At some point, apartments were actually not called homes. They were considered commercial property, depending of where you are. Propaganda exists in various forms. Now I'm going to use Georgia red because it's more dramatic than Cleveland State green. But if you actually read texts, including from the Architectural Forum textbooks that were written at the time, the idea of who would want to live in this monstrosity anyway? I mean, just bad. And so the idea was, you know, on one side, it's so many publications, you have these beautiful, pristine single-family homes, and then you have this multi-headed thing. And the idea that this would come and mess up with the peace that exists, when these are terms that exist in text, I'm not making them up. So it was like, somehow the idea was portrayed that if you already have an established area with single-family homes, even if you don't have something so enormous, but the multifamily homes do come, it's like it's like declaring war. You know, we must evacuate. I mean, if they become, it's an invasion. So we have to evacuate. It's like a warlike setting. It's a very dramatic way of portraying it. But storytelling, as we know, all planners, is very powerful, and eventually they told a better story. So a lot of the propaganda or storytelling, depending on your point of view, actually was focused on the idea that ultimately the best way for American society to prosper is to ensure the autonomy of the basic unit of the society, which was the nuclear family at the time. So images like this are everywhere. This kind of traditional Hollywood-looking couple, everyone would want that. I mean, who would want that? I mean, if you could, of course, and you can afford it, have that. In an article that I have not yet written, I discovered that in the Architectural Forum and in other publications from the time, a lot of it actually had to do, it was presented so, whether it was presented or misrepresented, that I don't know because I haven't written the article, and the article one day will be called What Women Want. Because a lot of the argumentation was around the fact that at the time when mostly males were going to work, it's safer, and actually we're doing this for our women. It was almost kind of a quasi-feminist project, if that's hard to imagine, but it was. And look, I love these particular images because see how the architect has the woman in mind. It's for her safety that we are doing it. So it's kind of a counterintuitive story about women and single-family homes, which of course Jane Jacobs strongly argued about, and we have been arguing against since the 1960s, but at the time, again, that was one of the original rationales. We are protecting the family from intrusions, safety, for health, and so forth and so forth. So the language that was used in Euclid is perfectly common. It developed in state case law over time, and with fairly similar language. So the last quote is, of course, the famous, infamous one, apartment house is a mere parasite. But the New York Board of Estimate, which was contributed to the New York zoning ordinance from 1916, was saying the same thing 10 years before Euclid. The protection of the home environment is vital to the welfare of the state. Random quotes, because there are quotes all over. From California, the year before Euclid, the Supreme Court of California, the justification for a one-family residential zoning may be rested upon the protection of the civic and social values of the American home. And this is my point. So you take an idea which was perceived as violently anti-American because it was restrictive of private property rights, but you Americanized it and made it familiar and actually a beloved instrument we have lived for over 100 years with now, because it was such a state priority to live in that particular way that Americans were expected to just put up with the regulations. See, one state priority, the preservation of the home environment, took precedence over another American priority. They were two different American dreams and somehow reconciled each other. And so at the end, that one won, and the rest is history. But just to bring you to my point that this is not like how it happened everywhere at the same time. So this is at the time when England begins to zone. They don't use that thing. These are planned development schemes. But I want you to pay attention. So this is, I can't remember. Does it say what year it is? It does say somewhere. Well, it's somewhere about the 1920s. So see how they separated their town of Sheffield in this particular case. 20 houses per acre. 24 houses per acre. 20 to 22. So several houses per acre, not necessarily. So there were restrictions that would say if you have a row of 8, then you have to have a break. And then you're going to have another row of 8. But there was no, at the time, idea, it had not occurred to the English mind that you actually would be mandating somehow that every unit is its own universe. It had not occurred to the British mind. And the reason that we know it had not occurred to the British mind, for example, is this was one of the greatest British housing experts at the time visiting the United States in 1923, so this is 3 years before Euclid, and here's the quote. So from the British point of view, not the least interesting feature of a U.S. zoning ordinance is that unit areas are allotted to one family. So do you feel his sense of wonder? He thought of this as being unusual because it was unusual. That's what I'm saying. It's made in America. Not that other countries don't have something similar, but really like we've contributed here to innovation. So there are many other reasons why this was done pre-Euclid, and I won't go over them. So economic, a lot. So there was a lot of conversation, storytelling, that maybe this was true, that we have to protect the property prices of the single-family homes. If invasion happens from other types of units, and there was actually empirical evidence at the time they had collected in New York, value goes down, so there's an economic argument. Of course, there was a lot of racism. This is Jay Grunholz was a civil engineer in Baltimore around that time, 17, I can't remember. And they were saying, well, gee, I mean, okay, so if we can't, because at some point it becomes, a lot of the southern cities, instead of having one family versus multifamily, they just had black and white. I mean, why? Let's just be obvious. But at some point in 1917, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, there's a case that you actually cannot specifically separate people by race. So at that time in Baltimore, Southern City at the time, was saying, well, okay, then I just want you as black and white, since that's what you're saying. I'll get to the same thing. So I'll have my one-family homes, and then I'll have my tenements, and I'll achieve exactly the same thing as if I did this by racial segregation. I just don't be so explicit about it. So this is eternally present, of course, in those early debates. People sincerely believe, Robert Whitten was the author of the first, I'm concerned whether he's not actually the author of the first zoning ordinance in Cleveland as well. He definitely is of Atlanta. So this is, he honestly believed that this is for social peace. See, bankers and leading businessmen should live in one part of town, storekeepers, clerks, and technicians in another, and working people in a third for their own good. So they associate with people of their own kind, and they all prosper, and there is no class warfare. So here's a one way of thinking. We might not think about this today, and I don't know what Norm would say. He probably won't say anything good about that, but at any point, this is the argument that was advanced at the time. So one other thing that I want to point is that, in my opinion, in addition to all these other factors, it isn't just about race and class separation and property. There was really a sincere consensus among planners at the time that there is something really special about the single-family home. You can date this idea if you want and read 1856 or whatever, those of you who are in landscape architecture, Andrew Downing Jackson, how that the home has a civilizing effect on society. If you have nothing better to do, you can open William Penn's instructions from 1681 on the development of Philadelphia, where he too argues that the proper unit of any new town should be the individual home separated from others by a generous distance. So in this particular quote, which I'm using as a proof of my idea, that there was something about it that was more than economics, culture, or even racism or classicism, if you will, but there was something about that there was a special civilizational value in the home that other residential structures simply were not able to accommodate. So Andrew Crawford, also from Philadelphia, the idea that you can have apartments in an apartment house which are attractive and even palatial is besides the mark, because an apartment is merely a tenement house with a college education. So you see how many streams of thought come together to actually lead to that purpose. So that's all I had to say. These are the two words I know in Latin, so I'm using them. Where are we going? I don't know, and I'm not necessarily volunteering the answer. But with this, we open the floor. Please argue, and I'll be the judge. So do you want to handle questions, or should I do it from here? Okay, so we're going to take just one or two questions, I've been told, the boss says. There has, like, one by one in an orderly fashion. Yes.
Okay, and that it was prioritizing the safety of women in society. To me, it seems a little bit almost like the opposite in a way, in that it sort of like, as you mentioned with Jane Jacobs, was mentioned later on, that it puts women separated from each other in their own place among with the rest of the head of family's property in the home, which is very neatly separated from all of the other men. I think that's really interesting, and I think that also, that gets really into the point you were making earlier, that zoning has this effect where it can fall on either side of, a political spectrum, whether it's, heavily nativist or it's considered very foreign, and I think that's really interesting. Would you agree that in that with the statement I made at the beginning?
Absolutely. So this is, you're now asking me you're asking me a question about that article that I said I haven't written.
Oh,
but
sorry.
at any rate, but when I write it. But see, that's exactly the point. I mean, things turn on their head.
Yeah.
I mean, the storytelling that this favors the family and the safety of women was very powerful. as it was at the time. Now, they didn't know the effect. I mean, we are different people, values have changed, but at the time that was actually a powerful argument. It was not invented by the first, as they call them, the zonists, the ones who, all you have to do is read Catherine Beecher, the treatise on the domestic economy, and make just, of course she was talking to middle class and upper class women, but show me one place in that very famous book, which some people consider early feminist, some people consider early anti-feminist. I mean, I don't really know. The point is, every time she thinks about it, she imagines them in a single-family home. So it's one of these paradoxes in history that definitely deserves its own article. I just haven't quite gotten there.
That is fascinating. Thank you, and I'm so excited to
Absolutely.
read that article when it comes out.
Okay, well, so am I. I'm interested, yeah. Okay.
So are you.
Another question, perhaps, and then we party together.
Yes, appreciate your conversation and discussion regarding this process. But now we're in a point in America where we're experiencing population decline. So now it's almost like this may be relevant for where we are. What do you think about where America is going with regard to population decline?
Let me put it this way. The decline, and again, I come from a small East European country, so to me, it does not look like America is declining. If you call this decline, you actually haven't seen decline. Because, you know, in 20 years, we lost a quarter of the population due to aging. But yeah, there is, you know, colleges know about the demographic cliff. I mean, from a current demographic point of view, I don't think single-family zoning makes any sense. Also because people want to have accessory units, they want to have their in-laws. It's not economical, it's not affordable for us to have single-family homes. So from a demographic point of view and how the American family is changing, it probably does not make sense anymore. We're simply living with a somewhat of an outdated instrument. It also completely doesn't work, and it's almost a joke. Like, how many of us actually work from home? How can there be a single-family home if you also work from home? So there is no such thing as a home anymore. And by the way, every time you made a business call in the 1990s from home, that actually made it also a place of business. So a lot of these things demographically, culturally, and the way, you know, how we work today probably make this instrument outdated. But here's the thing. What did you expect to happen? That it would change in a day? So Baumeister proposes this in 1876, argues for 17 years until 1891 to adopt it in Germany. It travels to the United States with enormous difficulty. Until it becomes implemented, it takes, what, 4 or 5 decades? So now that it has become the norm, I know society is moving faster these days, but it's now the norm, and for reasons demographic, economic, cultural, whatever they may be, it's just going to take a little longer to reform it rather than, you know, with just with one wish or from a consensus among likely-minded people at Cleveland State University. So things take time, and somebody in 100 years will probably study why we reformed so slowly this time, and just imagine how difficult it was to absorb the idea the previous time. So why would you think that changing the paradigm would be any easier today? Not good enough? All right. Well, thank you all. Thank you.
So I want to thank Sonia again for her keynote. Very interesting. And we don't have her book on display here, but if you want to find out more, it's available, as she said. Before I introduce the panel, I'm going to point out on the table, I think, most tables anyway, I compiled a list of the many articles and books in the last several years about reform of zoning, and in particular, most notable beginning in the city of Minneapolis, which has gotten a lot of publicity, attacks on single-family only zoning as restrictive, and also the need for more housing here in Ohio. The most recent report a few weeks ago showed that Ohio needs something like 230,000 units of housing, affordable housing, for people that are paying either too much or simply can't find housing at all. One approach to that is to relax the zoning for single-family housing to allow a little more dense housing in those neighborhoods, and in some cases to abolish single-family zoning altogether and substitute some kind of mixed zoning appeal. And I've listed here in a couple of pages the many articles that talked about that, particularly the need for affordable housing. Here in Ohio, City of Columbus is the most recent to do a complete overhaul of its zoning, but also other cities, some of which Sonia referred to, Seattle, Portland, Toronto, as well as Minneapolis, are all in the process of doing that. And a whole movement has emerged as opposed to NIMBY, which saw many neighborhoods oppose any kind of denser housing, or any new housing for that matter. There's arisen a group of YIMBYism, people in favor of more housing, and in our case, and for the sake of the panel discussion to follow, the need for more affordable housing in areas that otherwise were unattainable for people that could not afford a single-family house on a large lot. So with that, I'm going to introduce our panel. If I did their bios, that would be probably the rest of the program. So if you want to learn more about them and their organization, on our website we have more complete bios. Also, if you just simply go to their organization's website, you'll learn more about them. In no particular order, our panelists are Tanya Menes, a graduate of our college, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Cleveland Neighborhood Progress, as well as other things she's done in the past. Dennis Roberts, Chief Strategy Officer for the Cuyahoga County Land Bank, which is a sponsor of the social that will follow the program. Terry Hamilton Brown, also a degree holder from our college, Executive Director of the St. Clair Superior Development Corporation, and who's held many housing and redevelopment posts in the past. And Adam Davenport, also a graduate of our college, Manager of Neighborhood Planning for the Cleveland City Planning Commission. They're going to talk about equitable housing. I think on your table you have various definitions that we came up with of equitable housing, which obviously includes also affordable housing. They are going to be moderated by Beth, who will carry on, and all yours.
Very good. Can you hear me okay? All right, thank you. Well, good afternoon, and thanks for being here today, panelists. Glad to have you. We have a few questions that we're going to ask, and everybody's going to get different amounts, about 5 minutes to respond to each of the questions. Who knows where that will take us, though? So we're a little off schedule. We hope to be on schedule, but what happens, happens. Welcome, and thanks for being with us today. And as Dr. Keating said, this is in no particular order in terms of who responds at what time. So whoever feels like volunteering for the questions, please feel free to jump in. So let's start with equitable housing. So equitable housing is a term that's used a lot in planning and development. But what does equitable housing mean to you? How would you or your organization define or describe equitable housing? Anybody want to take a stab at that one first?
I'm in the end. I'll start.
Thank you.
And I figure if I start, then I won't have to. Sorry, I'm just joking. Because we talked about this. We met and we talked about it, and I think we had a lot of good ideas that came out of the discussion. But largely, how we all looked at this, and I would say specifically at Cleveland Neighborhood Progress, we look at equitable housing, is we look at the whole neighborhood. And that while obviously safe, affordable housing is a foundation and is critically important, we really look at it in the context of much of the talk that we just had about zoning, that really a mixed income, mixed use neighborhood where all different types of housing types exist and all different types of people can coexist really creates an equitable environment. So When you look at places where people can easily, where they can safely walk and recreate, where they can access the amenities that they need to live, where there's public transportation, that in and of itself creates equity. And then you layer on top of that, which I think many of my colleagues here focus more on the housing piece, the fact that it should be an environment where somebody can live in, I guess, one of those horrid apartment buildings that was talked about, to all kinds of housing types and single family and duplexes and other things. So that's how we would define it.
So let me underscore a couple of those points, and I agree with Tanya's primary thesis. You really can't, in my opinion, have equitable housing unless you have an equitable system. And fundamentally, it seems to me that people who live in historically disinvested areas have to have access to the same core conditions that exist in successful, thriving communities. In many cases, that's safety, right? Physical safety, psychological safety. They have to feel like they're being heard. They're not being ignored. They can participate in the government, civically, et cetera. They have to have access to opportunities, business opportunities, jobs. There's all kinds of studies. Obviously, you can't sustain housing demand if you're not working, whether it's market rate housing, whether it's affordable housing. If you don't work, you're not going to be able to keep any housing as a practical matter. The other aspect to me for housing is housing that appreciates over value. The way I see it is that that's actually a hedge against unaffordable housing. And what I mean by that, the question with housing isn't whether it's just affordable now, is it affordable in the future? If your house doesn't appreciate in value, how are you going to pay for repairs over time? Because houses need to be repaired over time. And in many cases, people take loans and mortgages against their houses in order to do much needed home repairs. Not to discount the fact that they may take equity out of their homes to pass on to the next generation in the form of paying for college or just passing on their homes to the next generation. I mean, when you really think of it, it comes down to is your zip code an asset or is your zip code a liability? That's really what it comes down to. I mean, I think many of us have heard of social determinants of health. It's basically that. Is your community helping you live longer? And is it helping you live a better life, or is it working against you? To me, that's fundamentally what equity is all about.
So I agree with Dennis about making sure neighborhoods are healthy, safe, and good places to have good quality of life. But the question is about equitable housing specifically. And I have to tell you, I was at the same table with everybody, but I was struggling on what's my definition. And, I'm not a scholar. I am a pragmatic practitioner is how I would describe myself. So I agree we need to offer choice for all ranges of people, but I also believe we need to have more information about what the needs are. So it's sort of simple to say we need affordable housing. And maybe as part of a takeaway after we left our meeting, I started thinking, because Beth said come up with specific examples. When I was at the Housing Authority, we needed to house families with large numbers of kids sometimes, so larger families. It's going to be affordable because the Housing Authority is helping, but there are not a lot of places where you get 6 or more bedrooms. So when we're talking about equitable housing, it's more than talking about who has access. It's more than just being affordable. It's what is the type of housing, I think. And for that, we need to know what's needed in that neighborhood, in this community, And I do believe we should provide a range of options in all of our neighborhoods, right? And not that we are causing certain size families or demographic of people to have limited choices, right? And that's part of the equity conversation. Types of ownership, right? Sort of the zoning conversation we were just having about the single-family homes. It's not necessarily a single-family home that's the issue, right? It's can you rent a single-family home, right, in a variety of neighborhoods. So the ownership type really matters. And where I am currently in the St. Clair Superior neighborhood, we're challenged in many ways with a deteriorating housing stock. You know, much of it was built very early on, you know, before 1935. And because of what Dennis just mentioned about the lack of home repair or good maintenance, it's in bad shape. But that creates an opportunity for rehabbing it. Now, the question is it for sale? Is it for rental? Or could there be congregate care opportunities for seniors or people with special needs? Again, that's the question of what is needed and how do we then create supply that addresses the various needs in equitable ways.
When I think about this term, equitable housing, I think a lot of my thoughts have kept coming back to my own house. It's 100 years old. It's on a street with a lot of the same kind of topology. It's an up-down double street. And it also has a shower in the basement. And this is where, like, the owner 100 years ago probably walked to the Eveready battery factory or the Westinghouse, you know, elevator company down the street, came back home, discarded their dirty clothes, you know, washed themselves, but then also walked to the local market in Detroit Shoreway or the church around the corner, the park. Like, when I think about this term, I think about what really government is doing to create that kind of 15-minute city idea, right? The idea that you can healthily live a quality life in your own neighborhood, the 15-minute walk, bike ride, you know, short bus ride. It's quite the interesting problem too, I think, here in Cleveland, because we have so many different neighborhoods to choose from, if you can. Continuing with the house analogy, I spend a lot of time at Home Depot. It's kind of my third place with that 100-year-old house, right? But one of the things, what the West Cleveland store is my store, and en route there's an Amazon distribution facility at 110th and Berea Road. I'm there pretty early in the mornings. I see shift change. A lot of people are walking to Amazon to work for the day. It's on a bus corridor. They're taking the bus there. They're not always driving. It's situations like that that I think we need to be dreaming about with, you know, the stuff that we're talking about with the Sites Readiness for Goods Jobs Fund and the neighborhoods, like, you know, that we want to create. Like, what are we actually leaving behind for the quality of a resident here?
Let's talk about your organization and how does your organization work in the equitable housing space, and what's your role in that?
I think I'll start this one, right? Being from the city, you know, Paramount, the role of government is pretty clear, right? We regulate where and when, what you can build pretty strongly, right? Through upholding the zoning code. And obviously, or maybe not obvious to everybody in this room, but for the past year and a half, we've had a pretty dramatic change in the way we are trying to regulate that with the pilot of our new form-based code. And that's in 3 neighborhoods around the city. It took many years to enact, but we're seeing some good amount of progress from this pilot, and something that we would really like to roll out with the citywide plan and map comprehensively around the city, right? Like, I think the practitioners in the room know generally that the code is fairly broken from from the old Euclidean standards, and that was talked about earlier with Dr. Hirt too. But practically here in Cleveland, that transpires to a code that was last overhauled majorly in the 1950s. That was really built out for the Lee Harvards, the Lee Sevilles, the West Parks of our neighborhoods, and it works well and fine for those neighborhoods. But then transactionally, especially with infill development or different wants and needs in the 21st century, that is very impractical. A lot of houses on the Near East Side, Near West Side, if they burnt down, you would not be able to build them back by right. That is a fundamental problem we need to change, right? And that's a little bit of what form-based code does. The majority of it speaks to more design standards and how to mix uses, but a very paramount practical effect that I see is like a big defense on the local homeowner being able to refinance their property if they're on a fixed income. The amount of calls that we get in the city planning office related to brokers trying to refinance a property or mortgage a property to a new owner when it doesn't conform is substantial, and that creates big roadblocks that the city should not be a part of, in my opinion.
Okay, back to the pragmatist in me. So a couple years ago, we did an affordable housing study for St. Clair Superior neighborhood, and we drilled down on the residents who are there, the quality of housing that they were living in. Was it affordable, or were they spending more than 30% of their income on housing? And then also looking at the supply and seeing where the gap is. And we estimate that we have a need for over 600 units of housing. Now, that doesn't say the number of bedrooms and sizes and all of that, but we do have that data, but I can't share that now. But that's a lot in terms of a gap. And a lot of that is related to poor housing conditions, the level or grade of the stock, right? Too many houses being Ds or Cs as opposed to As and Bs. And then the affordability of it. So what are we doing? We are working to try and keep people in their housing and improve their housing stock, whether it's with home repair or code enforcement, working jointly with the city, and then referrals, right, to the city and other agencies for low-cost repair. Obviously, that is one way to help people not be displaced, and that's also part of equitable housing. The other thing that we're doing, we're working with the city on a new construction project, and we've picked a single street that had vacant lots and existing homes. And the idea is to complete the street, right? Is to build new homes that will attract new owners into the community. Actually, here's another point about equitable housing. Oftentimes, we just talk about the affordable nature of it. I've said that. But what about giving people who live in the city options? If somebody wants a newer, bigger, more modern, just more convenient home, do they have to leave the city to get that? So we're looking to create more options. Some of them will be affordable, but not all of them. And I think, Dennis, that goes back to building stronger neighborhoods, right? Because everybody benefits in some kind of way, as you talked about maintaining values. So I don't think there's one approach, right? There are different strategies based on, what is your supply, who are your residents, and what are their options?
So I work for the Cuyahoga Land Bank, and we're a quasi-governmental entity. And the way I view it, we're the connective tissue between government and the private sector. So we go into communities and we hope to help fix and build broken real estate markets. In many cases, affordable housing is a symptom of a broken market. It's one of the reasons that I focus on the systems aspect, because there's a lot of symptoms of a broken market, and often we're focused on the symptoms and we don't get at the root cause, and that's why we continue to go in a circle. So what we tend to do when we go into a market, we look at data, we use judgment, and then we use those two things to inform an overall strategy. We look at all those things that you might anticipate, right? We'll analyze whether are there businesses in the area or proximate to the area, are there jobs? Why? Because people need to work in order to pay for homes, whether they're renting or whether they're buying. Pretty self-explanatory. We all work, or most of us work or want to work at some point. Is there decent infrastructure, or is there a path toward getting infrastructure? If you drive or you take the bus, we know we want decent roads, right? We know that's important. It's literally the foundation of a new house: water, sewer, lights, etc. Investors will not spend good money for new homes if there's not new or at least decent roads. So infrastructure is an important thing. Civic institutions, parks, libraries, green space, those things that the planners of the world might say walkability. I live in Lakewood. Those things go to quality of life. So we think about those things as well, right? And then we get to housing, whether, to Terry's point, market rate housing or, quote, affordable housing. Well, with regard to market rate housing, typically in Cleveland, in many parts of Cleveland, with the exception of maybe Detroit Shoreway, Ohio City, some select areas, if you have market rate housing, it's usually subsidized by government, typically, in many, many cases. Not all cases, many cases. In many other parts of Cleveland, you may have relative affordable housing, but it's substandard in terms of quality. If you live on the East Coast, Cleveland is actually pretty affordable. The issue is the quality is pretty poor. That's the fundamental issue. There's an article that came out in the Plain Dealer today while I was sitting here that says Cleveland is the #1 affordable place in the nation. It's in the Plain Dealer today. The issue is it's affordable, but the quality is horrible. That's the fundamental problem. That's what we have to address. The final thing that we look at is the environment one where investors will invest? Is it risky? So what we try to do is try to minimize the risk for investors so they will invest. So you say, well, here's an example. Like literally right now, we are working in East Cleveland. I see a number of my colleagues. I think my CEO was here, Ricardo Leon, and I see Kamala Lewis, one of my board members, Tony Braccatelli, and a number of us have been working in East Cleveland intensely for about 3 years. We call it the Circle East District. Look it up. It's $122 million where we are literally doing exactly what I've described. We are spending lots of money on a big commercial building to create jobs. We're working with the water and the regional sewer district to invest in infrastructure, right? That's the infrastructure component. We have built 7 homes with partners. It's not just us. With partners, market rate homes, so people want to live here from outside the area. We're also working on the affordability aspect. The way we're working on the affordability aspect is that we raised over $1 million from the feds, and we're doing home repair. We're giving away free grants for the people that live there so they can stay in the community and they don't inadvertently get pushed out of the community because the prices rise. The other aspect is we're de-risking the environment for our private sector investors. The way we're de-risking the environment is that the land bank have built the first 5 homes, and we've already sold 3 of the homes, because the first thing the private sector is going to say when they come in is, have you sold any homes? Because who wants to risk their money? These are the real tactical things that have to be done if we want to create, to me, in my opinion, a strong, viable housing system. Fundamentally, if we're going to get at the root cause and really get at dealing with some of these issues, we have to deal with the systems problem. It's very challenging, though. It's very, very difficult, and it's not something that one organization can do. It's going to take everybody in this room and certainly the partners on this stage. And each of these organizations is good at different aspects. So it requires lots of money and lots of partnership. That's my opinion.
So this is on, right? Okay. Cleveland Neighborhood Progress, our mission is focused on the equitable revitalization of neighborhoods throughout Cleveland, but our foundation are community development corporations in the neighborhood, so St. Clair Superior being one of them. And one of the things you started with, Terry, is I think one of the most important pieces of building equitable housing, maintaining at a neighborhood, is that you are doing that with the community's voice in mind, and that engagement and that understanding of what people really want in their neighborhoods, what they need, what type of housing they're looking for, how they want to see their neighborhood evolve is sort of the foundation of our work and of our community development corporation partners. And we do a lot of advocacy based on the information we get from CDCs, then going back to the city and the state and others to look at and ensure that projects are done in that fashion. A few specific things, though, that I think builds really well on what everybody else has said is first, like the quality of the house. I think, we can't get away from that. The poor housing quality, I always talk about the fact that, we have a lack of supply of housing in the city of Cleveland, and I would argue that more often than not, supply actually exists. It's just, again, in horrible shape. And so one of the main initiatives that I know many of you have read about that we are doing with the Lead Safe Coalition is that we have 9 neighborhoods that we're focused on with CDC partners doing lead remediation now. And at the end of the day, that's the baseline, right? Is this a house that anybody should be living in? And at this point in our country and with the wealth in our country, the fact that we have people living in homes, when I worked for the city of Cleveland, I went into homes and I thought, I can't believe this is the United States. So that's the first thing, and I think the fundamental piece that a lot of us work on. The very interesting initiative that actually there was a talk here at Cleveland State many years ago, and it started at the city of Cleveland, is the Middle Neighborhoods Initiative. And that's work that we're doing in 4 or 5 neighborhoods throughout the city, in neighborhoods like Collinwood and Lee Harvard, West Park, Jefferson Puritas, Old Brooklyn. And it's interesting because they're all neighborhoods that you mentioned that worked well with the old zoning code, right? These were our neighborhoods throughout the city where you had naturally occurring affordable housing, people, all different housing types. You could walk to all of your amenities. There's parks, right? These were the homes, and they still are the neighborhoods where you have the highest rates of civic participation. You have the majority of the income tax of the city coming. You really see these neighborhoods have always been stable and didn't need any kind of incentive or any kind of support. But as housing stock has aged and the people living in those homes have aged and the ability to make those ongoing repairs has diminished, and the commercial districts have gotten tireder, we're seeing those homes, and this is all over the country, tip, and those neighborhoods begin to tip. And so a really exciting part of that, though, is that housing intervention to get the market to work is something that doesn't necessarily, first, there aren't federal tools to do this work, but in many ways, that initial subsidy to renovate homes, get them to a place where most people today, right, they don't want to raise a family in a house with 1 bathroom, with 2 bedrooms, a single-car garage, without spaces where they can entertain. But many of our old homes can actually be renovated to a place where they can compete with the suburbs, with other markets. And it's critically important that both the commercial districts and the housing stock in these neighborhoods can compete, because we have to have people choose Cleveland. We can't just have it be that the people who are left are the people who are stuck in our city, right? And clearly that's not the case, but these are the neighborhoods that are really great entry points and where people can raise families. So that Middle Neighborhoods Initiative is a really great way of looking at a place where you can have these equitable neighborhoods where you really do see a mix of housing types. And then the last one I'll speak to is Shaker Square, where in 2020, CMP purchased the square out of foreclosure with the support of the city of Cleveland. And the important part of this conversation is we're working with many partners, many of them in this room, to now ensure that the 15 apartment buildings that are all along North and South Moreland, which are the naturally occurring affordable housing in a mixed income neighborhood, do not go to auction and do not end up in a cycle where we're losing housing. And I think when we look at an equitable neighborhood, this is one where you have this amazing historic commercial district. You have I think the largest transit site in Cleveland. Ohio City's market area is competing, but I think it's still the most active site, one of the most active job centers in University Circle and universities. This is a place that has always thrived in our community, but is very much at risk. And so I'll finish by saying I think all of our jobs and so much of what economic and community development is all about is we're working in that place where the market isn't functioning properly. And our work is to get the market to function in a way that it is working, but not so hot that then we start pushing people out. And that's kind of the secret sauce.
A lot of you mentioned successful examples or projects that you're working on now that shows some of the qualities of what you've described. But what about the obstacles? What are the obstacles to creating equitable housing in Cleveland? What are the challenges that you've seen or experienced? And how should we respond to those challenges?
We'll just keep going back and forth, I guess. And I mean, we talked about several of them, but I think one of our major challenges in the city of Cleveland is we have a very weak market, right? And we have a shrinking population. And I think one of the things we talk about all the time is that we have a region that has sprawled 35% as the population has stayed flat. And that is just not sustainable from housing and a community type. And so that speaks to a lot of things that are out of all of our control. But the part that I think we all are really working on is within neighborhoods to get the market to function in a way that invites the private sector back in. So much of that is about what are the appraisal values in those neighborhoods, and you started to talk about that. And we are not going to be able to build the new housing that people want if our current neighborhoods the current housing needs the level of repair and rehab that is required. And unfortunately, everybody wants a market solution for that. And I think the major obstacle right now is, I would say, is the funding to do that repair and rehab, right? You can't, we're seeing across the country, the port in Cincinnati and other places issue large housing bonds. It's Columbus that just issued these large housing bonds. And, but the Port of Cincinnati is doing some very interesting things too. But we're gonna have to find a public solution, a philanthropic solution to do the repair and rehab of homes in order to get the market to a place where you can build new and you can actually have people want to live in our neighborhoods. And it's not sexy and people don't want to hear it, but it's like the brass tacks. Like if we don't do that work in the city of Cleveland neighborhoods, we're not going to be able to see the kind of population increase that we need.
I think that to me, the biggest challenge is that the problem itself is multi-layered. It's multidimensional, and it's hitting us all at one time. And as a consequence, the response essentially has to be either simultaneous or sequenced in a way to have maximum effect. And it can't be isolated. And what I mean is, if the response fundamentally is, a little hyperbole, but if the response is we renovate a house, or we do new construction, or we do infrastructure, or we create jobs, it's just not going to get it done. I think my fundamental premise in the very beginning is a systems problem. So our response has to be a systems response. And I think we often are misdiagnosing the sickness in the beginning, so our remedy, our treatment is not adequate. And I think part of what we got to do is understand the nature of the sickness at first, then come up with the right treatment. So I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is once we do that, we're going to have to recognize that treatment is probably going to have to come from multiple organizations because, like Tanya's pointing out, it's going to take a lot of resources, and not one organization is going to be able to bring that to bear because it's going to be a lot, right? We specialize in real estate development. That's our bag. Another organization might specialize in community engagement. Another organization, the city, might specialize in making sure the regulatory approval process is fast so developers can get through it quicker, so they don't have to spend as much money, so the housing can be affordable. All those things need to work together. If they don't work together, it doesn't matter how effective Tanya is in community engagement. It doesn't matter how fast Dennis can get the private sector to come to the table, because the city's approval process takes too long, as an example, or whatever it is.
I agree.
It won't matter, and we'll continue to get stuck. So I think the biggest challenge is, one, understand the nature of our sickness, and then two, the ability of the various partners to work together to treat the appropriate and the proper sickness. And that's hard. That's what I think what's hard, is going to be challenging about it.
I have a few answers to your question, Beth, on this, and about different things we can do. And one, on the government side of what we can do is that kind of neighborhood layering concept that Terry was alluding to with what we're doing and what we're starting with in St. Clair. We're starting with 10 houses on East 67th Street, and we have a builder partner for those houses, and we're working with foundational support. But it can't be the only thing that we do in that neighborhood is build 10 new houses and call it a day. There needs to be functioning home repair. There needs to be functioning storefront renovation repair. There needs to be a functioning permitting system so Dennis can pull those permits, right? Like, you're talking to your number one fan over here about red tape like that. Like, all my staff out here know about Ron Swanson with that stuff. We really need to kind of double down on ourselves and our own bets in these areas, right? And going back to that kind of 15-minute city concept and the quality that we're delivering residents, do your street lights work? Is there a street tree on your tree lawn? Like, all of this stuff matters to create a neighborhood, to create a revitalized space, right? For all the work that we aren't doing in St. Clair with that the Metro Parks are doing with Cheers and South Gordon Park, and other partners like the Cleveland Foundation are doing on 66th Street with us, or our federal funding with the Superior Midway. Like, we have a lot of capital projects. We have a lot of attention focused on these couple neighborhoods over here. We also need to plan for those who live there and who should continue to stay there. That's the revitalization strategy that I'm interested in and that the city should be championing. Another answer to this question is honestly like what you all can do in the room. We haven't talked too much about it, but like, as an example, there's still a vacant school site lot at West 74th in Detroit, the old Waterston Lake site. That has been a affordable housing proposal for 3 years, and we have not gotten that over the finish line. Every neighborhood in Cleveland has an example like that. If we are passionate about these issues, if we're passionate about this type of development, then we need to let our elected officials know, and that needs to come clear on the more proactive side of things. Lastly, it's also the private sector. Like, the government can't just legislate its way out of problems. We need to put a lot of this on the private sector and say, here's what you should help with too.
To complement a couple of points, everything has to work, obviously, together, this partnership. But within a neighborhood, we really should try to be strategic, and I think that's what we're doing on this single street in order to build a place of strength, a place where value is created, both for the existing and the new, because we then use that to work on the next street. As long as we're just selecting things because it's available and not being strategic, we're not moving this forward with any kind of momentum. We have to be more strategic, and sometimes that's hard, right? We can't do it everywhere at the same time, or else it's like the peanut butter analogy, right? And that then, gets back to the question, is it equitable? Well, but we got to start somewhere. So thinking with, and getting, as Tanya said, getting the discussion going in various neighborhoods about what is the best way to start, based on the opportunity that's available, based on what residents think, based on, Adam just talked about the commercial corridor as well, right? What are the amenities that we're offering that will help somebody make a decision to invest? Whether it's an investor or a homeowner, it's still an investment decision. Those things are all important. And then Tanya, there's one thing that your team had been working on that I think is going to be a game changer if we could actually do it, but in this environment, I don't know. It is helping to ease the tax burden for existing homeowners when this new investment comes, and in particular, seniors or those with limited income.
Thank you for remembering that. Because we've been working on it for so long, but with a good amount of headway. I think many of you are nodding your heads. So this came out of the tax study that the city did now 7-8 years ago, where the biggest issue was property tax relief for residents when property values were rising very quickly in an area, and the fact that you really need state enabling legislation, and I think this speaks to so many things, like where we don't have local control, and so we had been working to move that state enabling legislation. There are 2 bills that have been introduced now, both in the Senate and the House, and because the conversation is so focused on property tax in all kinds of crazy ways, there are actually some good things that are coming out of that, and a good amount of momentum actually in this idea that what you would do is it would work very much like tax abatement, where you'd have residential stability zones in the way you have tax abatement zones now, and then local communities could decide within certain parameters how they would abate or reduce property tax for their citizens, again, if their values went up a certain amount and if people worked within, or fell within, I'm sorry, a certain area median income. So I'm glad you mentioned that. And I don't want to be like the downer as we're finishing here, but I think it came from the, I tend to do that though. I think it came from the talk that we just heard, is we're kind of the echo chamber in this room, right? We all think that this is important, and I think at a time right now in this country where we are actually the most segregated, and I don't mean from an ethnicity standpoint, I mean from a little housing standpoint, we're the most segregated we've ever been. And while there is a lot of conversation and interest in changing that because people are understanding that it's caused a lot of problems, when you actually get into communities and you start talking to people about their willingness to have an apartment building, even like 4 streets over or in a just slightly different way, or the we're all living the let's change the legislation on it around ADUs, and it's like you're I don't know what you're saying you're talking about, but I do feel like we need to acknowledge the fact that everybody talks about wanting change, but when you actually get into communities and start to propose it, it just pretty much shuts down.
That's the exact Waterson like example. Yeah, I mean that really is like that's the change that we really need to press.
Well, I'd like to thank you all for coming and talking with us today. So, before we wrap up, and again, you'll have the opportunity to, talk with speakers and panelists. But Before we do, I'd like to thank lots of people again. I'd like to thank our panelists. I'd like to thank our guest speaker, our guest of honor. I'd like to thank our advisory committee members. I'd like to thank helpers, college staff, other faculty, colleagues, really all of you that came out today to enjoy hearing from colleagues, meeting new people, and we want you to stay and feel comfortable. But really, before we go, I want to say that this is a free event. It is a free event, but it is also a fundraiser for the Norman Krumholz and Norman and Virginia Krumholz Scholarship. So in your program, if you are interested in donating to the scholarship, you can see on the inside right, there is a QR code to donate to the Krumholz Scholarship. I also challenge you. I put in $250 myself today of my money, not the university's money, not anybody else's money, my own personal money. I don't expect everybody to give that kind of money to a scholarship, but consider it. And I'll tell you why. I'd like to recognize two Norman and Virginia Krumholz Scholarship recipients today. Tasia, want to stand up? And Alex, where are you? Thank you so much. And so, again, to show you that proceeds from this event don't pay for food, don't pay for materials. They go directly into the scholarship account to be distributed to students through a process that we have every year. So I encourage you to donate to the scholarship. And I also, if there are other scholarship recipients in the audience today, if you could just raise your hand. We've had about 40 since the scholarship started in 2002. And so we'd like to see more. And we hope that the scholarship can be helpful to you in your professional, personal, and academic endeavors. And we continue to offer that to students. I also want to thank Kara and Steve and Sharon and Bob. Thanks, Bob. And also Kimberly for all of your help in putting this together. I really appreciate it. And before we wrap up, though, we want, yes? Huh? What? What is that?
So we are the APA board. My name's Haley. I'm the treasurer. This is Robin, the president, and Jackson, the vice president. And we have this wonderful plaque to give to Dr. Nagy for thanking her for everything she does for the students and for us. So this is for you. He wants a picture.
Unexpected.
Do you want to go around the chair or something? How do we want to figure this out? Well, here, let me go to the back.
Sorry, I didn't know this was happening.
I know, we would have set it up. Thank you. Of course.
That was very nice. Thank you. I didn't expect that. But before we wrap up, and you know that students are our most important thing. Students are always our most important thing. So just goes to show you, students are our most important thing. But we also want to honor a fallen planner. And I'd like to invite Bob Brown up to say a few words about the passing of Hunter Morrison that we lost earlier this year. We'd like to recognize and honor him. And Bob, thank you so much for saying a few words.
Since I'll be sharing quickly some personal reflections about Hunter, and I'll sneak in a few about Norm as well, I'd just like to know, by show of hands, how many people here either worked directly with or took classes from Hunter or Norm? I would say that's the majority. I figured that would be as much. Okay, so having had very close professional and personal relations with both Norm and Hunter was really one of the great pleasures of my career as a city planner here in Cleveland and Greater Cleveland. Although Norm and I never worked together in the same organization at the same time, I was privileged to co-teach with Norm in the last 2 courses he taught here at Cleveland State. And my wife and I also had Norm over to our house several times for dinner, along with some of the colleagues who we both worked with. I think that, you know, Hunter and Norm had very different approaches to city planning. Hunter believed that great urban design was important in uplifting Cleveland. Norm, in his commitment to equity, probably found very little relevance in urban design. But the fact is, one thing that they shared is they both had a love for Cleveland, and they were both committed to using city planning in their own ways to uplift the city and its residents. So that's what they shared. My vantage point for viewing Hunter's work was in serving as his assistant director for most of his time as director. I witnessed Hunter leading by example. We saw that Hunter was committed to elevating Cleveland to new heights, working collaboratively and effectively with partners inside and outside of City Hall. We also saw that despite the publicity that was attracted to high-profile downtown projects, Hunter placed just as much priority on revitalizing the neighborhoods in Cleveland, as did many of us on his staff. What we saw in Hunter was that we had a leader who was a consummate professional, brilliant, well-educated, maybe too much so at times for some of the council members, and we saw that his leadership would make our hard work more effective. Just as importantly, we experienced Hunter as a director who respected his staff and treated us as fellow professionals. Observing Hunter on the job each day, we knew that we were part of something that mattered, and that our efforts would lead to a better future, not only for Cleveland and its residents, but for our region as well. Contrary to the conventional image of government being a bureaucracy, Hunter created in the city planning office what I would call a family. We bonded together under Hunter's leadership. At the heart of it all was an appreciation that we were part of establishing an important legacy for the city we all love, led in this direction by a unique and exceptional urban planner in Hunter Morrison. I'm almost finished. Evidence of this bond is that all these years later, once a month, a group of city planners who worked under Hunter in Cleveland meet for lunch. And this has been going on for over 10 years now. And in fact, just this past week, we had our monthly meeting. We were at Astoria, a restaurant on Detroit Avenue on the near west side. So it just shows you what a family Hunter created. It wasn't just a job. He really bonded us together, and I think that's partly what the city planning profession is all about. It's more than just a job. It's creating a community, building a community among the planners, but of course, the real people who are all, who we all work for, who live in the neighborhoods. So I'd like to share that. I think Norm and Hunter really were incredible examples of people who use the city planning profession to lift us all up.